All right, so my name is Jackie Leibowitz, and I am the Water Resources Program Assistant at UF IFAS Extension, Sarasota County. And today I'm going to be sharing some tips on how you can prepare for Florida's rainy season, which has been officially underway since June 1st. For today, we're going to talk about a brief overview of Florida's rainy season, mainly when it occurs and how much precipitation we can expect. And then we're going to talk about why it's so important to watch the weather and wait to water. Afterwards, we're going to launch into rain sensors and other rain shutoff devices, rain gauges, and rain barrels. And then at the end, I'll close off the presentation with a couple other rainy season tips and resources, and then we'll open the floor to questions. And of course, if you have any questions that come up while I'm presenting, go ahead and post them to the chat. I probably won't be able to get to them till the end since I'm the only one moderating today, but yeah, definitely if you have a question on your mind and you want to post it so you don't forget, feel free to do so. So let's talk more about Florida's rainy season, which starts on June 1st, like I said before, and ends on September 30th. So that's about 18 weeks or 4 months of rain. And this is where we get about 60% of our rainfall for the entire year. So you can see what that looks like for Sarasota County on this chart from the Weather Atlas. So the numbers at the top of each point on the graph represent the average number of rainy days for each month. So out of the 30 days in June, it's estimated that about 22 of those days will see some amount of rain. In July and August, that number goes up to around 27, and then it falls to around 24 in September. So this is just sort of an average calculated from what we've observed in the past, but of course, this is probably going to look a little different this year. So now we have an idea of what to expect in terms of rain, but about how much rain should we expect during our rainy season in Sarasota County? So I would like to see if anyone from the audience has a good guess. So I'll tell you this, the United States has an average of 38 inches of rain per year. So in comparison to that number, so that's 38 inches of rain per year in the US, how many inches of rain do you think we get in Sarasota County? So do we get more than 38? Do we get less? Okay, we have a guess from Cheryl Ann. Interesting. So I'm hearing less. More from Brian. Okay. So I'll go ahead and answer. So it's actually 56 inches of rain each year. That's the estimate based on data from previous years. I know, so that's a lot of rain. It's almost double what we get in the United States on average. So yeah, in the rainy season from June to September, it's just about under 9 inches per month. And then in the dry season, it's just under 3 inches per month. So if you crunch those numbers, you would receive roughly 0.7 inches a week in the dry season and 2.1 inches a week in the rainy season. So according to University of Florida recommendations, you're pretty much set on water for the entire year. However, because these are averages, that doesn't necessarily mean that your landscape doesn't need irrigation at all. There's likely going to be weeks where there is no rainfall, and during those weeks, it's very important to make sure that your plant's water needs are met. But knowing when to expect rain and how much to expect is extremely helpful when it comes to figuring out our schedules, right? So we can monitor precipitation to help us plan events like weddings, fishing trips, and picnics, hiking and kayaking, of course, too. It's also really important for knowing when to irrigate. So of course, large-scale farms and agricultural operations use a lot of water and money on irrigating crops, ornamentals, and plenty more. So to help cut down on those costs and save our freshwater resources, they often use reclaimed water, but they can also skip watering on days when it rains. So this helps them save money, water, and it helps keep plants healthy since overwatering can lead to disease, which I'll get into in just a moment. But when it comes to turf grass and home landscapes, the same applies, right? So the typical household is actually going to use about 50% of its water consumption on outdoor irrigation. So that's a lot of water throughout the year. And University of Florida's IFAS recommends watering with 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of water per zone for each irrigation application. So Sarasota County residents should also be aware of watering restrictions. Some of you may already know them. In particular, for members of unincorporated Sarasota County, residents should only water once per week on their given day. So that's either Tuesday or Thursday, depending on what number your home address ends in. And you want to make sure that you're not watering from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So how can we track our area's weekly rainfall? There are many services available, but one way to keep watch of the weather is to use the Sarasota County Water Atlas. So this is actually data that I pulled today, so it's recent within the last 7 days. But it's this website that belongs to the Sarasota County Water Atlas that was put together by the University of South Florida. And it's an extremely handy tool for figuring out when to water your turf and landscape plants. So you can check daily, or like I did here, you can check weekly, and you can also check monthly precipitation data. And this is all displayed in inches. So this makes it really easy to figure out when your yard has gotten that recommended 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of rainfall. So beyond making sure plants are just getting what they need, finding ways to conserve water through irrigation is crucial in meeting future water demands. So our state is actually looking at a potential 400 million gallon per day shortage by 2035. So we need to do what we can to save water in the present. So based on this data that we can see here, there are a lot of places in Sarasota County that really don't need to water this week. So like I said, if you go to this website, you can check to see how many inches of water you've gotten in a week. And then if it's above that 3/4 of an inch, you're probably good to go on irrigation. So basically, that's the principle of watching the weather and waiting to water. So not only is that going to save water, but it's going to help you maintain a healthy yard, which is really important. So essentially, when you're watching the weather, you want to make sure that you don't water if it's rained in the past 24 hours or if rain is forecast in the next 24 hours. So if rain is on the way too, make sure to shut your system off if it's going to go off during one of your scheduled days. And the Sarasota County Water Atlas, which we just looked at, is a great resource for checking the latest rainfall data. And then if you have an automatic irrigation system, your rain sensor will help you make sure that you're not watering after a rain. But like I said, it's also really important to temporarily switch off your system if rain is on the way. So on that note, your established landscape plants, which are plants that have settled into your landscape, are not going to need much supplemental watering. In fact, most of the plants in your landscape beds can do without water in the summer, since we normally get so much rainfall. So if you have any zones with micro irrigation, you'll probably be safe to go ahead and turn those off for the summer. So when it comes to turning off one of your programs, every system is different, but there are a couple rules that apply to most basic irrigation controllers. So what you usually do is you just turn the knob to the zone, and then you put in 0 minutes for the runtime of that zone. So we're going to watch a short video from Michael Dukes about the basics of controller programming. And it would be great if someone in the chat could just let me know how the audio is doing and if I need to turn it up or down.
In this segment, we're going to talk about irrigation controllers. So how do these things work?
Well, they're actually fairly simple. Here's one here where the first thing you would do with a new controller setup is set up the day, hour, and the minute. So you've got the proper day of the week and the proper time set up in the controller. And then the next thing you would want to do is set up the days of the week that the irrigation can run. And most controllers we would probably want to set up in a custom type of schedule for day of the week water restrictions. So for example, on this controller, as I cycle through the days, you can see Monday is up and it's scheduled for irrigation. It says on. Tuesday is off. Wednesday is off. Thursday is on. Friday is off. Saturday is off. And Sunday is off. And the next thing on this controller is the watering time per station, or sometimes we call that zone. And not every controller is going to look like this, but they will all have these capabilities. That is, setting the day of the week, setting the runtime per zone or station, and also setting the program start times, which we'll get to in a minute. So on this controller, if we go to, this is a 6-zone controller. You can see 1 through 6 here. If we go to zone 1, you can see it's set up for 30 minutes. Zone 2 is for 20 minutes. Zone 3 is 60 minutes. Zone 4 is 20 minutes. And then 5 is 0 and 6 is 0. So although this is a 6-zone controller, only 4 zones are utilized. And those minutes are going to vary depending on the type of equipment and the time of year that the irrigation system is programmed to run. The next thing to set is the program start times. You can see that this controller has 3 possible start times, 1, 2, and 3 here. And the first one has the controller starting at 6:30 a.m. The second one, there's no start time programmed. You see the blank screen. And then the third one, blank screen, so no program start time.
So you get the basics of how to program your irrigation controller. But like I said, if you're just turning off your micro irrigation and you have that set up in a zone, you can just put 0 for the runtime and then it's not going to go off.
So
you might be wondering, why bother with all of this? Who cares if my plants get some extra water from the rain? Well, first of all, irrigation is only meant to be a supplement to rainfall, right? Not be a replacement for it. And secondly, too much water leads to overwatering, which has a number of unsavory consequences. So first and foremost, you're wasting potentially. Of course, you can have well or reclaimed water, and it's a bit of a different story there. But for those on city water, you're wasting potable water, which is considered non-renewable due to the low recharge rate in our underground aquifers. So it's a very precious resource. And so when too much water is applied to the landscape, it might be retained in the soil until it can be either absorbed by the plant or then lost to the atmosphere through evaporation. So you may think, oh, great, so my turf will just use it when it's thirsty again. And that's relatively sound logic, but unfortunately, a lot of issues can come from wet soil. See, your turf isn't the only thing that likes water. Bacteria, fungi, and pests all love a good wet environment. So when you have warm, wet soil, you risk the chance of these pathogens entering the space and interacting with your plants and potentially causing disease. So you're not only exposing your plants to disease, but you're also discouraging healthy root growth. So your turf naturally has shorter roots than other landscape plants already, which you can kind of see in this diagram here. Turf grass is to the very right. So when you withhold water, you can actually encourage those roots to grow deeper into the soil so that they can access the water that's there. So your plants are going to be weaker. And get this, they're also going to become more needy with more irrigation applications. So they're going to need more water more frequently because of their shorter roots, and they're going to need more mowing because of increased growth due to overwatering. So I like to think of this as the meow effect. So hear me out. If anyone here is a cat owner, you might be able to relate to this. So I want you to imagine it like this. Your cat expects 2 meals a day, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. Let's say you go away for a week, and while you're gone, your pet sitter is giving your cat 3 meals a day with 1 in the afternoon because it's so darn cute and it she can't resist those darling eyes. So when you come back from your vacation, you go back to using the healthy amount of 2 meals a day, but your cat has gotten used to being fed in the afternoon. So you'll be hearing incessant meowing in the middle of the day, probably for a very long time. So this is the meow effect. And I want you to think of your turf grass as if it were a cat. If you give it water too often, it's going to need more mowing and more water, leading to a high maintenance yard. So beyond the harm it can cause your plants, overwatering also leaches nutrients out of the soil and carries them into the water column, where they're not going to do anybody any good. And then water that doesn't get absorbed by the soil or your plants can run off your yard surface and then potentially contaminate local water bodies with fertilizer and other nutrients. So this can lead to a potential imbalance in freshwater ecosystems that are nearby, which is not something that we want. And if you use reclaimed water to irrigate, it's important that you're extra conscious of overwatering because of the nutrients that are already present in that water. So now we know why overwatering is bad and why exactly we should take extra care to make sure our irrigation systems don't run on weeks with significant rainfall. But if you're worried about your turf not getting enough water, you can look for these visual signs of drought stress to help you determine whether to turn on your system. So the first thing you want to look for is folded grass blades. So a small patch here or there doesn't mean much, but if at least a third of your landscape has folded blades, that could be a sign that your turf isn't getting what it needs. Second, if your grass appears blue-gray instead of its usual vibrant green, that could be a sign as well that it's not getting enough water. And then finally, and this might be the most obvious indicator, your grass doesn't spring back immediately after you walk on it. So this is going to leave footsteps, like you can see in this picture here, on that grass that'll last for several minutes, and that means you definitely have to water your lawn. So all of this isn't to say that you should wait for your turf to get to this point before you water. It's more of an assurance that your grass is probably going to be fine if you hold off on watering on weeks with at least 3/4 of an inch of rain. And then, of course, if for some reason that isn't enough, you'll be able to see whether it needs water with these visual signs of drought stress. So now we're going to talk about a few devices that will shut your automatic irrigation system off for you when it rains. That way you can just sit back and relax and let technology do all the work for you. So if you have an automatic irrigation system in the state of Florida, you are required by law to have a rain shutoff device. So this is any device that will respond to rainfall and shut off your system temporarily until conditions become dry again. So specifically, the statute reads that anyone with an automatic irrigation system has to properly install, maintain, and operate technology that inhibits or interrupts operation of the system during periods of sufficient moisture. So this technology mostly includes rain sensors and smart irrigation controllers, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But most residents that have an irrigation system already have a rain sensor since it's the cheapest option. So it's extremely important that you regularly check your sensor because these things have a tendency to wear down over time, which you may have experienced already. So there are several kinds of rain sensors, but for the sake of brevity, I'm going to show you how to test and maintain a cork disc sensor, which is one of the more efficient and popular types available on the market. So here's how you can test your rain sensor to make sure it's working. First, you want to run one of your irrigation zones and then point a hose at your sensor and spray for a short amount of time. So if the device is working correctly, the irrigation system should shut off. If the system runs, the rainfall sensor may have to be repaired or replaced. So it turns out that a lot of the irrigation systems that we evaluate in irrigation evaluations provided by our office have faulty rain sensors. So we recommend that you perform maintenance at least once a year to make sure that your sensor stays functional. And remember that each zone needs to be calibrated along with your rain sensor. So if your sensor isn't working, you can go ahead and try to clean your sensor. Sometimes that will help. You can move it to a better location. There's a chance that it's just being obstructed. Maybe there's a tree that decided to grow some branches over it, and that way it's not really getting that rain exposure that it needs to work. You can change the battery if you think the battery might be dead. Another thing you can do is just check your wiring at the controller and make sure it's not loose. And if it is loose, you can go ahead and tighten it, and then that could help. And then if you have a wireless sensor, you can check that box that's connected to your controller and see if there's anything going on there that could be a problem. And then another thing you can do with the cork disc sensors is replace those corks with new ones, which are very easy to order online. So if your cork disc rain sensor isn't working for you, you tried all those things and you just decide the maintenance isn't really worth doing every year, there are some other options to consider. So first of all, there are two other main types of rain sensors. There's weight-based rain sensors and sensors that use metal prongs to measure the electrical conductivity of the water. So these both use something called catch cups to collect the rainfall. So they do require regular cleaning, especially if they are in an area with a lot of trees or other common sources of debris that could get caught in that catch cup. So the next two choices I'm going to be discussing are considered smart irrigation systems. So the first smart irrigation system you can install is a soil moisture sensor. And these sensors are extremely accurate. They have two components. So they have a sensor and they have a controller. So the sensor works similarly to the rain sensor that measures electrical conductivity, or EC, but it's basically buried underground to detect that EC in the soil. So they usually have two thresholds that they can operate at, wet and dry. And if the soil is dry, they remain inactive. But if the soil is wet, they send a signal to the controller, which bypasses the system until the soil becomes dry again. So these are great in terms of the set and forget mentality. So they do need some particular installation. You have to put them in an open patch of turf that is going to adequately represent the rest of your landscape in order to work their best, right? So if you put them in like a really shady area that's not going to get a lot of rainfall, that doesn't really represent the rest of your yard, and so that could cause issues. So you have to make sure to put it in a nice open patch of turf grass. But they aren't that big, so it's pretty easy to just put them in a spot somewhere in your yard. But beyond soil moisture sensors, another smart irrigation system you can invest in is an evapotranspiration or ET controller. So these measure the moisture released by plants and can operate in one of three main ways. They can be signal-based, where they get meteorological data from local weather stations or other publicly available sources. They can use historical data, which measures trends over time and a pre-programmed water curve. And then for the last one for ET controllers is on-site. So that's probably going to be your most accurate and best choice for homeowners. So it uses measured weather data at the controller and then adjusts irrigation times based on that weather. So my last suggestion for those who really want an easy hands-off experience is to look into a controller that works with your smartphone so you can create easy, accessible programming that you can control remotely. So the one disadvantage to these is that they often rely on weather data that's being broadcasted to your phone from a weather network. So that's a little less accurate than on-site weather data. So what that means is it could be raining in many parts of your city, but you're that one little dry patch, right, in Sarasota County. So it turns off your system, but maybe you actually needed water that day. But otherwise, it's not a bad option, and it's certainly better than a broken rain sensor. So let's take a look at the time. All right, we have another short video from Dr. Dukes. We might not watch all of it, but we'll watch some. And this is just going over some of those different types of rain sensors.
In this segment, we're going to talk about rain sensors. So why are rain sensors important?
Rain sensors have been around for a number of years and are in Florida statute as a rainfall shutoff device and required for irrigation systems installed after 1991. So most of the irrigation systems we have today should have a rain a shutoff device or a rain sensor. And here we have some examples. You can see the one over by you is a catch cup type of device with 2 electrodes. And what happens is when that device catches a certain amount of water and it touches the electrodes, then it interrupts the signal from the controller to the valves. So it simply bypasses irrigation.
Is this another catch cup?
Yes, it is. That one actually is based on weight. The weight of the water presses the cup down, which then interrupts the signal from the controller to the solenoid valves.
Are there any other types of?
Yes, there is. Actually, this is the most common type of device, and this is an expanding disc rain sensor manufactured by a number of companies. This is just one example. And you can see this one actually has little notches that allow you to set the depth of rainfall at which it then interrupts the irrigation system. So, for example, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, or 1/2 an inch of rainfall.
What setting would you put it at?
Well, that's what people always ask. And generally we recommend about a 1/4 inch setting for 2-day-a-week irrigation or more frequent. And for 1-day-a-week irrigation, as much as 1/2 an inch set point, but not any higher, because most of our rain events are less than 1/2 an inch. And you can see this one works, this expanding disc sensor works with little discs that when they get wet, they expand and then it presses a switch down inside the device here.
Well, how do these work with the controllers?
Well, they actually wire into the controller. Some controllers have a port, a sensor port that they wire into, and some of the older controllers do not have a sensor port, but these wire into the common wire of the irrigation system, and it breaks the circuit. So in other words, there's not a closed circuit between the solenoid valves and the controller when these are activated.
So where would you install a rain sensor?
That's a good question. Installation location of these is very important for them to operate properly. They need to be installed in a location that's going to get rainfall, so in other words, not under the overhang of a house or other structure, not under any trees. Typically they're mounted on the eave of a house, but they shouldn't be mounted so that water from the roof runs off into the rain sensor.
So how do you make sure these things are working? I mean, do they require any maintenance?
So since we already covered that, yeah, it's just good to be able to see what those different types of rain sensors look like. But of course, the cork disc sensor is very popular and probably the most accurate out of all of them. So if you don't have an automatic irrigation system, a more accurate way to measure the rainfall in your yard is through a rain gauge. So rain gauges can either be manual or automatic. The manual rain gauges are usually composed of a tube that collects rainwater from storms. And then the automatic gauges often track weather events over time. So you can see rainfall patterns over weeks or even months. So there are several types of rain gauges, but the most common kind gardeners use are those standard manual gauges. And so a standard rain gauge consists of a funnel emptying into a graduated cylinder. So that's this thing right here. This is a Coco Ross rain gauge, actually. But users can keep track of rainfall by measuring the amount of water in that graduated cylinder. So you can get a bunch of different models and types, and you can purchase them online or even from your local home improvement store. But it's really important, regardless of which one you pick, to empty your gauge after each rain event so you can make sure that you're getting an accurate reading. So some of the higher tech models automatically empty themselves. So if you don't feel like checking your rain gauge every day in the summer, might be worth the investment to get one of those. But you also want to make sure, like the rain sensor, right, to put that gauge in an area where you're going to get regular, consistent rain exposure. So getting a rain gauge is also not a bad idea for folks who want to invest in a smartphone controller, like I was talking about before. So you can use them together to make those decisions about whether or not to turn your system off when the weather data might not be so accurate. So moving on, let's discuss some other ways you can take advantage of rainy season weather. So my first tip to all of you is to consider getting a rain barrel if you live in a home with a yard. And so some of you may already have rain barrels, and to that I say, good for you. If you have any pictures of your rain barrels, I would love to see them. So what rain barrels do is capture the rainwater that flows off your roof during a storm. And so rain barrels usually have a dispenser, mesh screen to keep out insects, and then they can hold about 50 to 80 gallons of rainwater at a time. So you usually just attach them to your downspout. They don't cost a lot of money to make, and oftentimes you can get them already fully assembled. So instead of watering your landscape beds and indoor plants with tap water, you can use a free source of sustainable water. Not to mention that rainwater is full of nutrients like nitrogen and oxygen, and those are great for plants, especially orchids, if we have any orchid lovers in the audience today. Rainwater is also great for washing cars, cleaning tools, and rinsing out recyclables. And bonus, using and storing rain also helps minimize stormwater runoff, which can help keep pollutants out of nearby water bodies. So there are guides online for building your own rain barrel, but you can often find them for sale at your local home improvement or garden store. And also, we have free rain barrel workshops through the county, and there is the option of buying a rain barrel along with your ticket. So in case you would like to get your hands on a rain barrel at a discounted price, you can check out our Eventbrite listings for any upcoming sessions. I'll go ahead and try to find a link to send everybody after today's webinar. But right now, sessions are currently offered about once a month. So I know we had our last one on July 17th, but I'll go ahead and see what we have for August. So another tip to take advantage of the rainy season is to add mulch to your plant beds. So mulch helps keep moisture in the soil around your plants, and this means your thirstier plants can be kept relatively moist between waterings. It's also a great idea because although we do get a lot of rain over the summer, we also get a lot of heat. So that water that they just got from an afternoon storm can sometimes evaporate in the sun before it gets completely absorbed by the plant roots. So you can choose from many different kinds of mulch, and what you want to do is apply about 2 to 3 inches around your trees, shrubs, flowers, and vegetables. And make sure that you're not volcano mulching. You want to make sure that there's some space between your plants and that mulch. So a few ideas for mulch include pine bark, pine needles, fallen leaves, treated melaleuca, sorry, just seeing some chat messages. Like I said, I will get to that very shortly. And of course, hardwood and eucalyptus mulch are some good options as well. So another tip is to practice good mowing. So more rain often means taller grass, which may for some of you mean more frequent mowing. So while you are mowing, it's important that you're only mowing about 1/3 of your blade height. So if you had grass that typically got to 3 inches tall, you would aim for only removing 1 of those inches. So that's going to help minimize damage to the plants, and it's going to keep your yard looking neat. So my final tip, or I suppose you could call it a rule, is to not apply any fertilizers to your landscape that contain nitrogen or phosphorus. So these 2 nutrients can be carried into nearby water bodies and lead to an oversaturation of nutrients in the water. So this can lead to unwanted algal blooms and other issues within these systems. So it's okay to apply fertilizer when your grass needs it during the dry season, but it's an issue during the rainy season because rain might carry away your fertilizer before it gets that chance to be absorbed into the soil. So then that rain turns into polluted runoff and then can contaminate our waters. So what I want everyone to do is to say no to nitrogen from June 1st through September 30th. And of course, there are some other options that you can use in the summer. So one thing that the county suggests is to use iron products with micronutrients so that keep them on green through the summer. Another option is to get better dirt by adding compost to your soil. And if you're interested in learning how to compost, we have a ton of resources through our office. We have live webinars and online classes, and we even have some in-person classes that we're offering now. And then if you use Florida-friendly plants in your landscape, they're not going to really need that fertilizer because they're used to the climate and soil already here in Florida. So the last little bit of advice I offer to you for our rainy season is to keep any grass or plant clippings on your lawn and away from stormwater conveyances, sidewalks, or ponds. So they can also be a source of nutrients that cause imbalances in those freshwater ecosystems. So here are some resources that may be helpful to you as you start to plan for your rainy season projects. And I'll go ahead and send this list out in a follow-up email. And here are some of the sources that I used for my presentation today. And I'll go ahead and use the remaining time to answer some questions. So let's see. Okay, I know we had a question a little while back. Okay, so UF was testing brands of watering systems. Is that true in the rain sensors? Yes, I think Dr. Dukes is doing quite a bit of research on saving water through using those rain sensors and other smart irrigation systems. So I can go ahead and link all the research papers that are available on that in that follow-up email. We have not done any tests on brands at our office, though. So we're just communicating that information that we're learning from research from the University of Florida. Okay, interesting about contaminated roof water. I guess that kind of depends on what that rain is making contact with. But generally speaking, rainwater should be more than fine to apply to your landscape beds. As for the predicted water shortage, by 2035, yeah, it's about 400 million gallons per day throughout the state of Florida. So that's all of Florida, not just Sarasota County. As for treated Melaleuca mulch, yes, it is a lot of water. With the herbicide, I mean, I will say from my own experience, I use treated Melaleuca mulch. I haven't had an issue. I'm sure that they clean out anything that they would be using to take down the Melaleuca trees. But what makes Melaleuca mulch such an awesome option is that it gives companies a reason to cut down those trees, which can be horribly invasive, especially around freshwater bodies. They just grow and grow and grow. And I know they're a big issue in the Everglades as well. So if we chop them down and turn them into mulch, that keeps them out of the ecosystem. So any other questions at the moment? All right. Well, awesome. Like I said, I'll go ahead and send over some relevant resources and a follow-up email. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple hours. I'll try to send it out pretty quickly. And if you have any questions that you can't think of right now, but you think of later, my email address is up on the screen, and I'll go ahead and type it in the chat. It's just jleibowitz@ufl.edu. So I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have about anything related to water, right? So irrigation, reclaimed water, ponds, you name it. So thank you so much for being an amazing audience today. I love all the engagement. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing those rain barrels. If you have any in your yard, go ahead and email me a picture. All right, cool. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.